Okay, so let's launch into the first question then, Anne.
Yeah.
So virtual school obviously cannot be compared to actual school. It would be like comparing apples to oranges. Having said that, what exactly are we trying to achieve with virtual school?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I would say there's two things, right? Basically, we know that the time that we have and the learning environment are so different that we need to stay focused on the fundamental skills and knowledge that we hope to bring along with the students by the end of the year. So really making sure that we design learning experiences and lessons and instruction around focusing on those key fundamentals of the skills and knowledge, but also maintaining a sense of connectivity and community with the kids, between the kids and their teachers, but also between the kids and each other, which is obviously one of the aims of regular school, so to speak, is building a learning community where people have relationships and trust, and they're growing together. So trying to, as much as possible, create opportunities for that to happen, given what we acknowledge are serious limitations, of course.
That's really great. Actually, just today, speaking as a parent in year 4, my daughter received a postcard from her teachers, and that was such a kind and wonderful gesture. And we were also surprised to receive it. I mean, that's sort of going the extra length. So I really appreciated that from our teachers.
I love that.
Yeah, I hope other teachers in other schools are doing that as well. So you were saying like key fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Could you like unpack that a bit more?
Mm-hmm. Well, so if you think about literacy, for example, in a given year level, in terms of writing skills, one of the units of instruction may be persuasive writing. And you might have a number of mini lessons around persuasive writing, developing the skills around that, building upon those skills to practice writing just a paragraph and then putting several paragraphs together. And so really just looking at each unit of instruction and trying to distill what are the core skills and knowledge in this unit of instruction, and how can we deliver the instruction and the practice for the kids on an online learning environment, and then also learn the best ways to assess that so that we know, have they learned it? Where are they now? What do we need to do next? So it's really looking at each unit of instruction and distilling the core things that you, by the end of that unit, you want to make sure that your students have grown in those. We know that not all kids are going to be at the same place at the end of any unit of instruction, but that all of your kids have moved forward is the objective.
Yeah, and I think actually when you say breaking any unit of instructions into small, like daily sort of exercises, I think actually that works quite well on a virtual learning format, because kids, like teachers can set out some work and then the children go away, or they discuss it during the online class and then they go away, do it, and then they actually come back and look at it together. I think it actually works well, like pretty close to an actual classroom, I would say.
That's actually a good point, Theo. One of the kind of tried and true strategies for teachers is called chunking, right? And, you really want to look at kind of a large body of concepts and skills, and then you want to be able to chunk that for your kids in kind of digestible bites for them to understand, practice. And I think this delivery mode actually kind of lends itself very naturally to chunking, just like you said, because we do really have to think very deliberately about how can we chunk this, because our time together with the kids is less. Obviously, our face time is much less, keeping in mind that we wouldn't want to keep kids online from 8 to 3 in the afternoon. That's, for this age group, it's just not practical at all. So we have to really, yeah, we have to chunk things, but it is a strategy for teaching in general. So yeah, I'm glad that you saw it that way.
Yeah, and each class is then it sort of boils down to the essence of what needs to be taught that day or that week, and people really focus on that, which is not necessarily a bad thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. In your opinion, what are the pros and cons of virtual school?
Oh, well, I think the pros are a little bit like what we just talked about. I think it really forces us as educators to be really clear on what we're doing. Like what's the real purpose of this unit of instruction? What's the why? So I feel that that's a benefit that does transfer to the kids. I think there's lots of benefits actually, kind of in the kind of more social emotional realm. I can talk about that in a moment. But in terms of the cons, also social emotional, is just time together. I think we all feel that now, right? We're very separated from our colleagues and our friends and our families, our extended families. So those things that we take for granted, we now realize how important it is to be in person with people, to see people's facial expressions, and to enjoy things together, to laugh together, to negotiate things together. That those are all kind of the human condition shared, that it's really hard, I think, to emulate that online. And we often feel I've been in many sessions with teachers and kids, and it works well, but there are moments where it just doesn't feel the same as being together. So,
Um, yeah, and it forces sort of parents, I think, to put on many hats. So they're the parent, they're also the teacher, trying to provide the sort of face time, and yeah, which is why a lot of parents are sort of pulling their hair out.
I understand.
um, yeah, sorry. And so that's the cons, and we've sort of gone through the pros. So I suppose that would also go into the greatest challenge in delivering an effective virtual school program, like the the challenge of replacing this FaceTime and personal support that kids receive.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one of the big challenges. And another one, obviously, is that parents and caregivers around the world have been thrust into this responsibility that is completely unexpected, and many people don't feel kind of prepared on different levels to take on that responsibility. But here we are. So I think that's one of the big challenges too, is just our parents, and again, parents around the world, struggling with, how do I do this? Am I doing it right? Is it enough? Is my relationship with my kids going to be, worse because of this, stress that we're experiencing together? I think that's definitely been one of the biggest challenges. And behind the scenes, I think for us from the school side, it's just been a whole other level of work and collaboration to design this entirely new school, basically in a matter of weeks. So that's been a big challenge. I think it's wearing on teachers significantly. There's a high level of stress, long hours. And I think that's kind of the piece that is hard for people who aren't in the school to see, is despite the fact that teachers aren't at school or with the kids from 8 to 3, they can all attest to a significant increase in their workload because of the need to collaborate, to figure things out, to research things, to keep in touch with the kids and parents and give feedback regularly, feedback that they would normally be giving in person to the kids in class throughout every day, now needs to be done electronically. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
lots
So
of.
in hindsight, actually thinking back, the November sort of interruption by the protests was actually a blessing in disguise, because it was sort of like a trial run for a lot of schools to gear up for the virtual learning. We did it for a week. I mean, had we not had that, things would probably have been even more scary in January.
completely agree. I know, silver lining, right?
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
despite the fact that what we did in November, we have all of the documentation and communications on what happened in November. Um, Despite the fact that what we did in November looks almost entirely different to what we're doing right now, it was a starting place. And I think it was hugely helpful, especially because the school community was scattered around the world during Chinese New Year. We didn't have the advantage that some schools had later in other parts of the world to actually be together on site and kind of see it coming and say, okay, we're probably going to close in 5 days. How are we going to make this happen? We were all not only not on campus, but in different countries. So it was, I'm so thankful that we could go to that framework, that November framework, and say, okay, this is the starting point. And not long ago, the Global Online Academy did an online learning kind of week-long seminar for educators. And one of the first things they talked about was how schools need to kind of phase in their online learning. And there's 3 key phases. And as I read through the article, I thought, that's exactly what we did. There were like the first few days have to kind of look like this, the quick, let's get it together phase. And then this phase, the second phase, which was like, okay, we're kind of starting to make some changes, but we know based on feedback and our own experiences that so much more needs to happen. And then you move into the third phase, which is, I think, where we are right now as a school, in the primary school and the secondary school, where we've put into place many different things now to improve the experience, hopefully, and improve our students' learning experiences as a result. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a steep learning curve for sure on the school side, but as you can see from the questions which are now coming up on the chat,
Okay.
so we might move on to like day-to-day application of virtual learning. So we want a lot of parents obviously would like some tips from you on how to, so for example, how to keep kids focused on online classes, tips, and also any tips you can give to parents who are now having to wear the multiple hat of being a parent and a teacher.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I would say in terms of, especially for this age group, primary, the basic premise for, much of what we do at school is around time and the management of time, and acknowledging that young kids, even all the way up to year 6, we really can't expect them to remain focused on any given task for more than a few minutes at a time. So I think that is maybe an adjustment for parents, because what you may have seen before were your kids focusing for long periods of time at home on things that they wanted to focus on, things like their hobbies or playing with friends, whereas now it's schoolwork that's being done at home. So I think my biggest advice would be, to have not a strict or stringent approach to the day, but definitely have a shape to the day for the kids, whether it's you or someone else who's guiding them, where the amount of time that they're spending on tasks is very interspersed with breaks and other activities. Even 15 minutes of focusing on something, with concentration is a long time, actually, even for a year 6 student. So you can imagine going all the way down the school, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but actually that is developmentally really what we can expect from kids. So I think that the concentration factor is, it's a big question, and I've heard parents mention it quite a bit, especially because this isn't really nearly as fun or as engaging as regular school. So I think we also have to be patient with ourselves and our kids, and empathize with them, and I think it's okay to say, yeah, I get it. This really isn't that fun. It's not as fun. But to break it down again, to chunk it, you may have seen the Pomodoro, what's it called? The Pomodoro approach or method that adults use, where you kind of focus for 25 minutes at a time. You take a 5-minute break, and then you go back to work for 25 minutes. And after 4 of those, I think it's 4, you take a longer break. And it's just, I think biologically, the breaks are so necessary. So that would be probably my biggest advice, is have some sort of a shape to the day. You know, take it one task at a time, and don't expect really long periods of focus for the kids. And some kids, even at school, we've used timers, and I've used timers before in my previous jobs, where you say to kids, okay, let's just set the timer 5 minutes. And they can see the timer, and it's not like a pressure timer, but it's kind of like, in 5 minutes, we're going to stand up, we're going to look at, you know, doing Go Noodle online, or we're going to turn on some music and dance, we're going to have a snack, we're going to stand out in the balcony or water the plants. So I think that scheduling the day with lots of different breaks, and some shorter and some longer, will help with the concentration, but also just empathizing, I think. And honestly, it's such unusual circumstances, and families have a lot of stress because of all of these other circumstances, whether related to work, finances, travel, other family members, that I think it's also, I would encourage parents to also, you know, if there's just a day where you just need to say, we need to do something totally different today, then take that, you know, you have permission to do that. Give yourself and your child permission to say, you know what, today it's got to be a different day. We got to hit the reset button and do something totally different. You know, like find an amazing cake recipe and let's make a wonderful cake. You know, I think when kids see that you also recognize that these are not normal circumstances and that you can be flexible, it's good. I think if we hold on to, you've got to do everything just like you always do it at school, and we got to stay on top of this. If it's so tightly wound like that, it can cause, I think, more stress. I think it's more authentic to say to the kids, yeah, this is hard, and we're going to do the best that we can do. We're going to try to stick to a schedule and help you feel productive so that you do have free time. But to have those days or those moments where you just kind of say, let's pause, it's good for everyone's mental health.
Thanks, Anne. So with that in mind, I think that segues well into, I think it's Lily's question, which is, so we aren't actually trying to achieve the same amount of teaching via virtual learning, are we? We, as parents and school, we should be adjusting our expectations of what the children are like actually learning. I mean, they're learning other skills, I'm sure, like rather than the strict curriculum that they would have received at school.
Absolutely. So, you know, the way that we've talked about it as a staff is that, you know, we're trying to distill the fundamentals. There is no way that we could possibly teach or expect the outcomes that we would in the regular school year. So those fundamentals, we feel like those are what we are committed to. But having said that, every family has different circumstances. So we have to recognize that. So different kids will progress in different ways throughout this phase of online learning. And this kind of goes back to the pros and cons question, and maybe linked to what you said and what Lily said. I completely agree. I think that there are enormous, unexpected, and maybe less than tangible learning outcomes that kids are gaining through this experience that perhaps are priceless. You know, in so many times in school, we talk about, you know, kind of preparing our kids for life and for the real world. And here they are, like they actually are needing to apply many of those, you know, you might call them approaches to learning, as they're called in the MYP, or you might call them soft skills but they really are needing to apply at all different ages these things that we practice and we talk about and we value so much, like managing our time and taking our responsibilities seriously and working together with others through challenging situations. They're all having to do these things to manage their online learning experience. So although it's not easy for us to measure, what that kind of internal personal growth is, I think it's actually amazing. I really do. And I feel on our side, the staff, we have had this opportunity, to grow enormously in so many ways that we would have never had the opportunity had school just gone on as usual. So I think that's also a really important thing to keep highlighting to ourselves, to each other, to our kids, to our colleagues. It's hard and it's stressful, but there are really important things that we're learning through this experience. So I think that that's also something to be valued and highlighted. I would love to highlight that, all the time, but I also have to balance, the messaging, because so many parents are really concerned about what is lost this year. But I'm not that worried. I think the kids are going to be fine, particularly because the vast majority of our kids will come back to us next year and we'll have all the opportunity in the world to calibrate our curriculum and meet them where they're at. So parents should not worry at all that their children are going to be behind or that they've missed something that's really going to be a disadvantage to them later. There will be, and now it's not just CIS, it's pretty much schools all over the world. So be assured that schools will be adjusting and calibrating their program for the group, but also understanding where different kids are individually and meeting them where they're at. I do see some more questions. Sorry. Go on.
That's great to hear. Like I, for one, am smiling when you remind me of that. I'm like, oh yeah, a few. I mean, the whole world, we're all like in this boat together. So, we don't have to worry so much. But speaking of time management, then, this is a question from Fiona. It's true that it's our kids are learning, from, they've been thrown into the deep end and they're really having to manage their time. And also just switching between, speaking from a CIS perspective, they have at least 3 subjects a day, which they have to manage and attend lessons for and then try to do homework for. So what tips do you have to help young children, like 5 to 10-year-olds, with time management? I know the Pomodoro and the timer thing that you've already mentioned. Any other tips you might have for young children?
Well, always taking one task at a time, I think. But along with that, checklists, I think, are really helpful for kids. It's very visual and it's very straightforward. And I know that for young kids, really all the way up through year 6, they're still so young in year 6, that does require parent guidance. But to kind of look at the day ahead and say, okay, let's make a checklist. And then you can use highlighters, for example, to prioritize and say, okay, what do you feel like? Okay, by the end of the day, I definitely want to get these done, mom and dad. So we'll highlight those yellow. And then maybe what are the things that it would be great if I could get these done, highlight those blue. And then, the things that can wait or I might get to, highlight orange. So that the kids kind of have a system, a visual system, to start to think about what's the most important thing here, what's important but less important, and what maybe can wait. I think that, and again, the chunks of time will be so minimal for a 5 to a 7 or 8-year-old. They might be working at something from 5 to 15 minutes if you're lucky. But so there's that piece. But I think teaching kids to look at things in terms of priority is a great life skill. You know, what's my most important thing today? What should I really make sure that I do today? And on those checklists, I think it's good to talk about what are the things that you can add that are about taking care of yourself. Like, have I moved enough today? Have I been drinking enough water today? Did I do something fun with my brother or my sister? You know, putting those kinds of things on the checklist and talking about the priority that those have in anyone's life is also, I think, a good life lesson that, you know, we can't just have it only be work on the checklist, because then we're kind of teaching them probably our own very bad habits, right? Which is like you kind of postpone taking care of ourselves and our, you know, health and our sanity because we're just trying to get through the list. So I think it's good to put on the checklist just well-being and fun things so that kids, you have an opportunity to, you know, impart on them that this is also something that needs to be prioritized. So,
speaking of priority, then I think our children naturally prioritize by doing their favorite subjects first, and then over time sort of losing concentration and neglecting subjects they're not interested in. In my case, in my children's case, Chinese. Chinese is like getting pushed.
oh no, it froze.
Uh, across all subjects.
Sorry, Theo, you froze a little bit. So you got to, yeah, some kids put what they like first.
Yes, do their favorite subjects first.
Right.
That's like a natural prioritizing they're doing, irrespective of how we would like them to prioritize their work.
Yeah.
But how do we motivate our children to sort of stay focused on all subjects, not just their favorite subjects?
Yeah, great question. Two things come to mind. I think one thing is, I think even younger kids, it's always interesting to talk to kids, to have them reflect on their current way of operating. It's not to say it won't change, because some people like to do the hard stuff first, right? And they kind of save the fun stuff for last. And some people do the fun stuff first and they save the hard stuff for last. And that's just kind of, different people are wired differently. So I think it's kind of a good exercise to just to have kids explore how they operate, you know, and maybe not try to fight against that, but just have them be aware. Oh, I'm the kind of person who likes to do the hard stuff first, so that when I get to the fun stuff, I'm still motivated, you know. And for you to share with them how you are, because yeah, as adults, we have different preferences and that may change over time. So that's one thing I think that can help kids just become more self-aware, which may help with their overall concentration. No promises, but I think, you know, from a very early age, from a counseling standpoint, it's like the biggest focus for, you know, guidance counselors and kids is like developing understanding of yourself and then developing understanding of others. So I think it's really helpful to give kids a completely, you know, non-judgmental opportunity for them to explore how they prioritize. But the other thing is, you know, if I have to be perfectly honest, I think incentives work a lot. And, you know, different families have different kind of, I don't know, structures or values around incentives. And I'm not saying, you know, that we want to create, you know, this world where, you know, all the hard stuff needs to be incentivized for kids. But I think there are moments and times when it's okay. It's okay to kind of say to your kids, what do you think? Like, what could we kind of make as an incentive for you so that you kind of push through this part that you really don't like? Again, I think it's super important to say to kids, like, I get it. There are things that none of us like to do, you know, so that they don't feel badly about that, but that they recognize, oh, this is normal. Everybody has stuff they don't like to do. But to, you know, think about that as a parent. you know, I have no, you know, concrete suggestions, again, because different families have different values around whether it's food or material items or TV time or, you know, money, you know, there's different things, but it's something to think about. And, you know, I know that everyone is kind of stuck at home, and I don't want to encourage parents to get into like a whole bribery loop or anything, but sometimes incentives, when I think discussed in an authentic way, can be helpful.
Yeah. I agree. And we always teach we talk about children's like agency in primary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we start, so I think just having the conversation with our kids, sitting down saying, okay, so like you say, go through a checklist. What would you like to do first? Or this is the hard bit. We know you don't want to do it, but how can we help you get through it? Like, and then maybe the bribery stuff could come in there. Like maybe after you've done this, we could do this, or I'll give you a break and you can have some sweets or something. But I think it's quite important to talk to our children and like, just even if they're young,
Mm-hmm.
they have a preference and they have a view, and that's giving them the agency which we say we want to give
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. Completely agree, Theo. I think it makes me think of, as a parent, when my kids were born, I became a huge fan of Love and Logic, Parenting with Love and Logic. And although I mean, it's been around for a long time, maybe more than 30 years, but although they don't use the word agency, what they talk about through all of their books and all of their materials is control and choice. And as humans, even young children, we operate better when we have a sense of control, when we have some choice. And they, in their parenting kind of approach, they encourage parents to give as many choices as possible so that when there isn't a choice, you've kind of invested. You've put so much into the bank account with your child. You've given them choices on, you know, and it really takes letting go of a lot of the little stuff. That's what I found as a parent, you know, like what they want to wear. In the big picture, does it really matter what they wear? Does not matter at all. Let them choose, you know. So there's so many kind of hundreds of little choices throughout every day that you can just give up. Just let the child choose, and they have a sense of agency and control. So that those moments where you really, it's got to be a parent's choice for their welfare, for their well-being. And sometimes just because you're having a moment, at least you've invested, you know, in the bank account for the kids. So I think, yeah, with the online learning, to think about it that way too, you know, to give as much choice and control as possible, to kind of help the child feel like they're in control, but fully supported by the people, the adults around them.
Yeah, thank you. So going back to the questions which were submitted earlier on, I think you've more or less answered this question already. But some parents are worried that kids won't be at the same level when school resume in the fall, and i.e. their child might be behind their peers. Could you just like, yeah, I think like you said, like school and teachers, everyone's going to adjust when school resumes to make sure every kid's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in the school structure, we have, you know, many great teachers who understand how to assess where kids are at and how to address those needs in terms of small groups. They're even doing that now online with, you know, different teachers are joining lessons, going into breakout rooms. So all along, the teachers will be designing opportunities to really kind of meet the kids where they're at, but that will just continue. So there will be that, there'll be careful assessment, any individual or small group support that's needed in the classrooms. but also we'll be looking at our whole program of study to make sure that it's calibrated for the group. So, yep.
Yep.
No worries. We have this.
Okay, so next question. How important is social interaction in terms of learning in virtual learning world?
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah, huge. I just think I think there was a question about, you kindly sent the questions ahead, Theo, and I was noticing a question about, what teachers might have noticed is like, is maybe going well or better for kids. And I think, there are some kids who have really benefited from kind of learning solo in a sense because of their personality type, their learner profile. Some kids have seemed to kind of thrive in some sense. So I think there are those kind of things that make us think, oh, okay, there are some kind of cool elements here. But by and large, I think the social piece, for no matter what the personality type, is just, it's priceless. And if nothing else, when we hear about all this kind of modern schooling and 21st century learning skills and different ways of doing school, this whole experience confirms that school as an institution, as a place of learning and a place of relationship, it's not going away anytime soon. It's just so, I think, important for kids, and maybe the biggest loss is that kids don't have opportunities to grow as many opportunities to grow in their character and in their heart as they do when they're together, right? Because when you're together, you're going to make mistakes. People are going to hurt each other's feelings. There's going to be conflict. That all of those things that are not necessarily fun, some of those things are hard, right? We deal with tears and fights and all sorts of things, but those are actually huge learning opportunities for the kids. So they have less opportunity, I think, to make mistakes because they're not together at school. And those mistakes are, perhaps, frankly, more valuable learning than any other academic subject. Is all the mistakes you make along the way and the journey and the relationships that you make. So, yeah.
There's still plenty of conflict happening in my household. And they're learning.
Oh, everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So my kids had been screen-free until homeschooling started. Now they experience the screen. Is it possible to go back to a screen-free lifestyle when everything is back to normal?
Wow. Gosh, great question. I mean, I can't say with any certainty. I think every family is different. But, for those families that have that kind of question, I guess my advice or my suggestion would be to continue to contextualize why the screens are necessary right now, but that we look forward to a time when we won't need to use the screens so much, right? So I think to really remind the kids that this is for a purpose and this is a phase, but it won't be like this continuously, so that when, as a parent, you need to really kind of rein in the screen time, that it's not a surprise, if that makes sense. I think to, kind of keep that a part of the storyline as you're moving through these weeks, so that, and maybe even to just say to the kids, yeah, once we get back to school, once we get back to campus, mom and dad are going to be really happy to put the screens away. You've gotten really used to them. You've done an amazing job with everything. But we do feel like it won't be as necessary for you to be using them at that time. So just to, I think, give the kids plenty of regular reminders that it will look different once campus is open again.
Yeah, and I think, prior to all of this, there's never too much screen for a child. Like, it's always the parent who's going in and saying, okay, this is enough, too much screen. But now, actually, there are kids who are experiencing too much screen themselves, and they say, actually, now I realize what too much means. And there are times when I get tired and I want to switch off, which is even better because now they realize for themselves and they wouldn't want to do it. And it sort of takes the pressure off the parent having to stop them.
It's a good point. I agree.
Yeah. Because I just heard one of my year 11 students tell us, like, I think I'm procrastinating too much. I realize now that I want to work. That's what they said to me. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
Revelation.
Yeah, so it's like this self-awareness thing. Okay, so the final question I have on my list now is how to empower and not micromanage young children who need supervision. I think we've also touched on this throughout our conversation already.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe to just add to it, even young kids, it's important to ask them what do you need? How would you like me to help you? And see what comes from those conversations. And, if kids say, I don't need any help at all, I got this, and then the whole thing is a mess, you can revisit it and say, look back and say, what do you think? Do you think that that was a good way to approach it? It doesn't mean that, it's going to, change overnight or that they're going to suddenly realize, exactly what they need from you. But I think to keep asking the kids, what do you feel like you need from me? How can I help you? Again, it kind of puts more control, over to them. And, in terms of the assignments, it's tough. I think parents are doing an amazing job of trying to, keep the kids kind of completing things and turning things in. It's a balance. It's a new thing, and I think kids do need a lot of support. But on the other hand, it's okay as a parent to say, if you didn't turn it in, that was your responsibility, so that they don't become too used to, kind of subconsciously waiting to be pushed by you to complete something. Because then, they hopefully will face the natural consequences of not completing their work, right? And those natural consequences don't have to come from you. That comes from some communication with the teacher, likely, hey, I'm waiting for your blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I'd say keep asking the kids, what do you need from me? How can I help? And then, to whatever extent you feel is comfortable and reasonable, allow them to make the mistakes.
What about with regard to the really young kids, like 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds? Is the expectation for them to be completely supervised throughout their time when they're interacting like online with their teacher?
I think what we've said is that an adult should be in the area. And that is primarily just because of the tech piece, right? To just make sure if there's glitches or something, is happening with the screen, that there's someone there, so that the child doesn't become anxious or, kind of lost, like, what do I do now, or disconnected. And, besides that, I think that's kind of more technical support. We don't necessarily expect parents to be sitting right next to the child. I think for the young kids, parents know their kids best, and, they've kind of probably figured out what works for their family. But it's mostly to just be present around in the space where the screen is so they can provide some support, and also probably just have a sense of what's happening, because those are our youngest kids, right? The reception kids are 5, year 1 is 6. So that's still pretty young.
Great, thank you, Anne. So I think that's it from the pre-submitted questions. We have 10 minutes left to our discussions. So does anybody else want to ask Anne anything here now? I think you can just speak up if you wish.
Hi, Anne, it's Martin here. Thanks so much for your sharing. I just have a quick question from my side. Sometimes things get heated up between the parents and the kid. When the patient are running out. What is the best method of sort of preventing that happen? Because I think you know much better than us that sometimes we try to follow the schedule. We try to have this sequence of things that helps them achieve, or try to help them achieve what we both agreed on. But usually it doesn't turn out perfectly. And usually towards the end of the day, there will be a lot of tensions and things start getting heated up. What's the best way to avoid that? That's my first part. And the second part is, in case if things really got heated up, how should we handle it? Because we still seeing each other throughout the exercise and for dinner and for nighttime. So it's kind of hard sometimes. And I hope you could enlighten us on that. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. I know, I can imagine. I know it's been an extremely unique, it's stressful situation for pretty much all families. Well, going to your one question about when things get heated or your patience is running out, I guess I think of how I would handle situations like that. I basically try to say, you know what, let's take a break from this and let's come back and talk about it in a little while. I think it's very authentic to say to our kids, my patience is running out. I really want to have a good conversation about this, but now probably isn't a good time for either of us. So let's just pause and we'll come back and talk about it later. Because invariably, right, in those moments, right, your heart rate is up, all those kind of stress, kind of physiological things are happening that really at that stage are literally beyond our physical control, right? So we're so much more apt to handle situations poorly when our body is in that state. So I'd say it's really not a problem to be honest with your kids and say, yeah, this is getting kind of stressful. Let's take a break and we'll come back. And then, there's a good chance that your child will also be in a better frame of mind. I think for kids, the important thing that I remind myself of is that when we start to get worked up about something, what happens is our kids are thinking about that. They're thinking about mom or dad being angry or upset or impatient. They're not thinking about the thing, the thing that you want them to think about, which is, have I finished my math? Was I playing nicely with my brother? They will very quickly shift to your emotional state. That's what they will focus on. And, our kids love us and we love them. And, as stubborn as they might be, there's virtually no kid in the world who wants their parent to be upset with them, right? So they're going to think about that. And then it's kind of like the moment is lost, right? Because we want them to think about the thing. We don't want them to think about our emotional state. So it's always better to just, there's usually almost everything can wait, right? Only in cases of like emergency where someone's physical safety is at risk, almost every kind of other crisis or conflict, it can wait. You just kind of hit the pause button and say, let's talk about it later. So that when you do go back to it, your emotional state is even, and then it can help them to think about the thing instead of about your state. So that would be my advice. And that's also a love and logic thing now that I think about it. So I didn't come up with that myself, but it really does work. Yeah, it's like when kids make mistakes, you want them to think about the mistake. You don't want them to think about you being upset about the mistake, right? Because then you kind of lose that moment of learning. So that was one question, Martin. You kind of had a two-pronged question. The other one was?
Yeah, so thanks for the answer. It's very helpful. I think the part about having them focus at this thing or the event is more important than the emotion. I think that's a trap that unfortunately a lot of us falls into. So my second part is how not to get to that stage of running out of patience.
Yeah, great question. Oh, gosh. Well, I think it sounds like you're doing, a lot of the things that we talked about, kind of have a schedule, and provide the support. And so, I mean, it depends on your family and, how your kind of setup is, but maybe think about in how things are running right now. Are there places or opportunities for your kids to have more choice in how it goes? And because maybe some of the pushback or the challenge is that they're feeling, that suddenly mom and dad are my teachers, but they're really not my teachers, and so they might be feeling a little bit like, you're kind of setting everything up and telling them exactly how and when to do things. Maybe see what happens if you kind of design the day more with them kind of choosing the structure and see, again, I think it depends on each family, but to maybe approach if you already haven't, approach the design of how you do things from a standpoint of, what do you think? These are kind of, again, it kind of goes back to the checklist, like, okay, these are the things that you need to do. What do you think the day should look like? Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. It was really helpful.
And also a reminder, don't put so much pressure on yourself and take care of yourself too. Yeah, I think our parents are so hugely supportive that they take these responsibilities so seriously, but it's a lot. It's, kids learning from their parents at home there's just so many, unusual things about that, that, I think parents also have to, give themselves permission to take some of the pressure off.
Thanks, Anne. Really helpful.
I think that's the key takeaway from this hour is we all just need to sort of take a deep breath and adjust our expectations and not ask so much of ourselves and our children, and to just try to make the most of this time we have with our kids. And just trust that when everything is back to normal, we'll all be normal.
Yes. Well said, Theo. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so, do we have any other questions? We're sort of running out of time now, but maybe one final question if anyone has any. Nope, no more questions. Okay, well, thank you so much, Anne, for your time today. I learned so much. And so as we said at the beginning, this session has been recorded. We will probably publish an edited version later on. And Lily has also kindly agreed to write an article about what we've discussed to be shared with the alumni community. So we hope there'll be future sessions related to this, being in the virtual learning home. So thank you so much, Anne, for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all of your support.